Hello. If there's any POI, please just unmute your mic because I won't be seeing the chat box. Okay. I will begin my speech in three, two, one. Imagine living like an independent country every single day. You elect your own president, you have your own army, your own laws, and your own passport, your own democracy. But every time the world talks about you, they tell you that you're not really on your own country. That is Taiwan today. For decades, Taiwan has been forced to live under a framework that says there's only one China, even though Taiwan completely governed itself for years. They have built their own future, but they are still expected to stay politically silent about who they really are. Today, we believe that cannot continue. That is why this House believes that Taiwan should formally abandon the One China framework. So proud to propose. Before we begin into our arguments, we need to understand what this debate is really about. Our side is not talking about Taiwan to suddenly become independent overnight, because in reality, Taiwan has already been governing itself for decades. Taiwanese people elect their own leaders, make their own laws, run their own economy, and defend their own borders without asking China for permission. The problem is that while Taiwan lives as a self-governing country every single day, it is still forced to keep an unofficial position that suggests it is connected to China. This debate is about whether Taiwan should continue living with that contradiction, or whether it should finally be honest about its own political identity. We believe that no democracy should have to hide who it is simply because another country refuses to accept it. Now, why is this important? This debate matters because it is ultimately about who has the right to decide a nation's identity. Should that decision belong to the people who actually live there, vote there, pay taxes there, and build their future also there? Or
UI?
should it belong, no, thank you. Or should it belong to another government that claims ownership over them? We believe the answer is actually simple. Taiwan's future should be decided by Taiwanese people. Democracy is built on the idea that people have the right to choose their own government and determine their own future. If we truly believe in democracy, then we must also believe that Taiwan has the right to officially define itself without being forced into a political framework that was no longer reflects reality. Now, what is wrong with the status quo here? The opposition will probably tell you that the current situation keeps peace. However, the status quo is not real peace. It is simply uncertainty that has been normalized. Taiwan already acts like an independent country, but is expected to remain politically unclear just to avoid upsetting China. This creates a constant confusion about Taiwan's status, limits its ability to represent itself internationally, and gives China an excuse to keep claiming authority over Taiwan. Every time Taiwan wants to expand its international role, China uses the One China framework to argue that Taiwan is not allowed to act as its own country. As long as Taiwan continue to accepting this framework, China
UI?
can continue, no, thank you. China can continue using it to pressure both Taiwan China can continue using it to pressure both Taiwan and the rest of the world. Instead of solving the problem, the status quo only keeps Taiwan trapped in an endless political gray area where its reality and its official position never match. So what is this motion trying to fix? Our motion fixes that contradiction. Taiwan already governs itself, right? It already protects itself and makes decision for itself. The only thing missing is the official recognition of what already exists. By formally embedding the One China framework, Taiwan aligns its political position with reality instead of continuing to live under a framework that allows another country to define its identity. This motion is not about creating a new reality, it is about recognizing the reality that has existed for decades. We believe no democracy should be forced to hide its identity simply to make another government comfortable, and that is exactly what today's motion seeks to change. So our goal is to prove that Taiwan should officially reject the One China framework because it is no longer reflects reality and prevents Taiwan from fully exercising its right to determine its own identity and a future. A democratic society should not be forced to hide who it is simply because another country disagree. By abandoning this framework, Taiwan can honestly represent itself, protect this will of its people, and stop allowing another government to define its political identity. Moving on to my argument, which is the One China framework harms Taiwan's sovereignty. Okay. Our first argument is that One China framework directly harms Taiwan's sovereignty because it allows another country like China to keep influencing how Taiwan is seen, treated, and represented, even though Taiwan already governs itself independently, but it still questions itself. A country is only truly a sovereignty.
UI?
No, thank you. When it has the full freedom to decide its own identity, speak for itself, and make a decision without another country's permission under the status quo, Taiwan cannot fully do that. Let's first understand what sovereignty actually means. Sovereignty is not just about having your own government. It also means having the power to officially decide who you are, represents yourself to the world, and make choices without another country controlling those choices. Taiwan already checks almost every box. It has its own president, its own elections, its own military, its own police, its own passport, its own economy, its own laws, its own healthcare system. Taiwan does not ask Beijing before passing laws. Taiwan does not ask, I don't know, Beijing before electing a president. Or Taiwan already functions separately every single day. But despite all of this, Taiwan is officially remains under the One China framework. That means Taiwan cannot fully say that we are our own country. Instead, it has to remain politically unclear because of China's claim. This creates a situation where Taiwan lives one reality but is forced to represent another reality, and that is not full sovereignty. So how does this framework harm Taiwan? There are several steps here. For example, number one is the framework gives China political legitimacy. Because Taiwan never officially rejects one China framework, China can continue telling the international community, even Taiwan has not formally abandoned one China, so our claim over Taiwan is still valid. Notice that China is no longer the only one making this claim. The framework itself becomes evidence that China can point to. Instead of looking like an unreasonable country making random demands, China can argue we're simply defending an agreement that still hasn't officially rejected. This immediately makes China's political pressure much stronger. And then, two, other countries become afraid to recognize Taiwan more openly. Most countries already have an unofficial relationship with Taiwan. They trade with Taiwan, they invest in Taiwan. Some people even cooperate on technology and security. But because of the one China framework, many governments became extremely careful. Why? Because recognizing Taiwan more openly could be seen as validating their own China policy and damaging the relationship with China. China is one of the biggest economies in the world. Many countries depend on China for trade, investment, and manufacturing. So instead of taking risk, many governments simply avoid giving Taiwan a stronger recognition, and Taiwan loses opportunities not because it lacks ability, but because of political pressure created by this framework. Three, China gain more opportunities to interfere. Every time Taiwan wants to expand its role internationally, whether joining an organization, signing agreements, or participating in international discussion, China can step in and say Taiwan is not a separate country. Because Taiwan has never officially abandoned the One China framework, China's argument becomes much easier to sell internationally. So instead of debating Taiwan's actual situation today, everything goes back to China's historical claim. This means Taiwan spends more time defending its own existence instead of actually representing its people. And four, Taiwan is forced to limit itself. Perhaps the biggest harm is like a physicality and a political here. So Taiwan begins making decisions based on only on what is best for its own people, but also on how China might react. Imagine always thinking, can we say this? Can we join this? Can we call ourselves this? Will China punish us if we do this? That is not a complete sovereignty. Even another country's reaction constantly shapes your own political decision. Your independence is already being limited. Imagine a student council here. The student council elects its own president. It makes its own rule. It plans its own events, collects its own money. But another keeps walking around saying, actually, that student council belongs to me. Now, because the student council is popular, uh, I'm from the proposition team proud to propose.
Later for the speech, I call upon first speaker of opposition.
All right, let me just set up my timer first. Okay, just to confirm I'm audible.
Yep, audible.
All right, okay, POIs, please unmute because I won't be checking chat. And yeah, okay. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. the moment that Taiwan sends out the signal that they're opposed to not being with China, that they do not want to be with China anymore, that they oppose China completely, this is when the harms are actually going to affect the people. It is going to trickle down into people's daily lives. They're going to face a lot of sanctions and whatnot, and that is why I'm incredibly proud to oppose. Before moving on to any arguments or setup, a couple of rebuttals towards PM. I think the first thing that they tell you is, oh, we want democracy and we want freedom for Taiwan so that they can actually make their own decisions, so that they can actually stand as an independent state, right? I think that this is incredibly tense with their own case, right? Because PM tells you so many times in their speech that Taiwan already governs itself, that Taiwan already acts like its own country. And then in the same speech, they tell you that Taiwan really want this freedom and that Taiwan is incredibly limited, right? I don't understand which framing is correct. If it is true that Taiwan already acts as its own independent state, then why exactly is it so urgent? And then why exactly is it so urgent to want this like freedom in the first place, right? But second thing they tell you is, oh, this will harm their sovereignty. I think firstly, this is at their best case like symmetrical, or it's actually worse on their side because after Taiwan becomes completely independent from China, they still need to gain this sort of sovereignty back, right, as a new independent country, right? But I'll also tell you more about like legitimacy and like the legitimacy of Taiwan on my second argument, right? But secondly, even if you believe that it harms sovereignty, they don't really tell you why the harms of sovereignty is incredibly like very big and that it's incredibly urgent, right? Because my impacts later will touch on actual people's lives and how it actually harms people's lives, right? Insofar as we haven't actually heard why the impacts of losing sovereignty is worse, then I don't think the harms will actually outweigh. Right. But lastly, they tell you that, oh, other countries will recognize Taiwan more openly. And this directly clashes with my second argument. So I'll just address it then on in my second argument. But a few points on setup then. Firstly, let's actually crystallize what exactly both worlds looks like. I think the info slide was already very sufficient in telling you that, oh, the one China framework, that means that currently it's very like ambiguous, right? The situation with China and Taiwan are like they're not really openly addressed, right? So I think what it looks like on their side when you abandon the framework is you're making a very open statement. What that means is probably the government of Taiwan is making a big statement that, oh, we want to separate from China now. We are completely opposed with the ideology that China has had like this whole time, right? Well, on our side, what we support is this ambiguity where we do not address the situation, where it's basically like the status quo now, where we just do not openly address it and we're not we're not like completely like pressing on this issue like very heavily, right? But two arguments then that I'll posit to you within my speech. Firstly, on how on their side you actually get sanctions from China. Let's actually frame the current relationship between China and Taiwan in the status quo. I think firstly, economically, Taiwan's main economy is basically based on semiconductor chips. When they can mass produce these chips and they export it, right? But also note that these semiconductor chips are basically mainly exported to China, right? China is the main consumer of these chips because they're very heavy on like technology, like for example, producing phones or producing or like for AI, right? Which is exactly why the biggest exporter right now is China, right? But also secondly, let's talk about military, right? Because currently Taiwan is being backed by the U.S. military, right? Because U.S. opposes China, right? And yeah, this is basically for precaution if like China to like defend against China, right? So why exactly would you get sanctions, right? I think firstly, China has been very clear to how they're opposed to like Taiwan leaving them, right? Which is exactly why they'll give sanctions because they're probably going to threaten like, oh, if we do not like go back as one country again, we're going to keep like doing these sanctions and we're not going to lift these sanctions, right? But also secondly, note that China has already ever threatened Taiwan in the past with like military action, right? They already done this previously by like having like these military drills near Taiwan to like sort of scare them. And note that in the state and note on their side when Taiwan actually makes this statement, it's going to be infinitely worse, right? It's not just going to be military drills. I think there's actually a chance that they're going to actually like do like actual military action, right? So what exactly are the impacts of this sanction, let's visualize this. Two layers then. Firstly, let's talk about economically. I think because you're now not able to export your semiconductor chips to China, which is your main economy in the first place. Firstly, you lose a very big income on like trade, right? Which is exactly, and you lose like a very big portion of your country's income. Also, and yeah, that also can trickle down into like being unable to like progress. For example, you're unable to the money that you're supposed to get is now not able to be put into like education, into infrastructure, into just building your country in general, right? But also secondly, since there's going to be less demand for these semiconductor chips, the factories are going to close down, which actually like millions of people will like lose their jobs, right? Which means that it affects the working class, which are the vulnerable actor here, right? But also thirdly, note that because of this, you're going to lose a lot of investors too, right? So there's literally no one backing you up in like economically, right? But let's talk about military then. I think US is insufficient in the status quo to defend from China because firstly, they have their own wars. They currently are in an Iran war, right? Which means that all the troops and all the money and all the weapons that US have is currently being allocated to this, right? And they're very volatile, which means they probably might not defend you because they're focused on their own war. So the impacts of this are very simple. You're very vulnerable to an attack when it happens, especially because China has a very big military. The importance of this is twofold. Firstly, you harm the livelihood of people when when their country's economy is like going down, right? But also secondly, yeah, you won't survive economically. You probably won't survive you probably won't survive that much on like military as well because no now US cannot really back you in the status quo. But second argument then on harming like international relations towards other countries, right? Let's frame props world. I think firstly, this will obviously garner a lot of like international media attention, right? It's going to be very big news. But then secondly, that means that countries have to pick a side, right? Refer to like the Palestine or Israel war, where like a lot of countries have to now like obviously like make a visibility on which side of like the country that they want to support, right? So why does it harm international relations with other countries? First, the other countries will mostly side with China because they're scared of being sanctioned by China too. Note that PM already says this when they say that China is very big like economically, right? China has a lot of trading partners, for example, Indonesia, right? They're able to like export and do like trade for very cheap, right? They're known for this, right? But also secondly, currently, Taiwan has supporters because China is seen as the conflict starter, right? But now on their side, Taiwan is seen as the more aggressive one because they'll be seen as the one that started the conflict by moving away in the first place, right? Which is why countries would less likely support them and more likely support China, right? What are the impacts of this? I think firstly, they're going to like have less trade with other countries, right? Because they're scared to do trade with Taiwan. But also secondly, on legitimacy loss, right? Because they've been seen as under China, right? Which means now they have to regain their legitimacy that they lost back now, but independently. So it's harder to join like international organizations, right? But also thirdly, on like loss of allies for military conflict, right? The importance of this is very simple. Firstly, you should weigh this on urgency, right? Because now you're a newly independent state. You have to do things on your own now, and now you lost. Not only did you have sanctions from China, but you also lost relationship with other countries, right? So it's going to be hard to like rebuild and whatnot. But secondly, on the livelihood of people, and that is why I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Now time for a speech. I call upon second speaker of prop.
Am I audible?
Yep, audible.
Wait, I'm setting my timer.
Wait, guys, before we proceed, is it fine if I change my internet for a second?
Boleh, boleh. Tolong itu ya, konfirmasi kalau udah apa terfix and bisa move on.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep,
Testing
yep.
1, 2, 3. Hello.
Oke, oke audible kok.
Hel- Hello, test. Audible nggak?
Audible,
Hello,
audible.
guys. Oh, crap. Oh, wait. Okay. So sorry for the delay. You may proceed.
Oke, yaudah. Second proposition, you can just continue.
Okay, is it okay if I start now?
Sure.
Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 points on deliver. Firstly, clarification, second, rebuttals, and lastly, arguments. Okay, I will start on my clarification. Okay, they stated that we must have our framing, but then sure, even if Taiwan has already their own military, government, etc., but internationally they haven't been recognized by other countries because of those frameworks, which affects their certainty of identity. So yeah, sure, even if Taiwan has already governed their own system of country, but then they haven't been recognized internationally, which makes them still uncertain until right now in the status quo. But then yeah, moving on to my rebuttals, I have 2 points to rebut. Firstly, where they stated towards responding towards all of their majority of cases, which they're basically talking about like saying it's better to be dependent in these situations because we won't survive in terms of economic and military, especially with those like US things and etc. etc. But but yeah, no, but I think it's not worth it. The trade-off is not worth it. If we keep on being dependent towards China, it's not better for the long term. Because yeah, firstly, Taiwan, they of course because they already govern their own military, their own government system, etc., etc. Of course, they already like systemized or making a backup plan before they decided to formally abandon this framework. Because yeah, they're not that stupid. Of course, they will like plan some strategy first before abandoning this framework because it's for their own safety net too. And of course, it's actually better for their long term. So then, yeah, the trade off is actually more worth it in our side of the house rather than their side of the house. Then, yeah, secondly, responding towards their cases about Taiwan losing legitimacy towards most of the countries, and then like Taiwan
You
will be seen as
live?
later, and then yeah, Taiwan will later be seen as the person who started the conflict. But then I think it's not going to be that easy for other countries to not like Taiwan to choose to pick on China's side because there are some countries who doesn't like or who doesn't want China to be dominating. For example, like US is like competing with China and they don't want China to be dominant. So yeah, some countries who don't like China, it won't be that easy for the majority of countries to instantly pick on China's side. Then yeah, okay, let's just jump into my arguments. I only have one argument, which is whether or not this can actually fulfill our sovereignty as a nation. Yeah. So firstly, I would like to extend my PM first about identity. I think yeah, identity is very important because in the status quo, Taiwan is still questioning their own identity, which makes them uncertain, and it doesn't just stop like there. Taiwan will be confused to make some decision for themselves because they will think like, will China accept this? Will the contracted framework accept this, etc. Then yeah, I think Megan has already explained it too on you why sovereignty is actually very important because imagine being a country that's been controlled your whole life, even if you already have your own system of like government or etc. Sure, let's accept the fact that your needs will be fulfilled by China. But the thing is, I think in terms of long term, it'll only backlash us as Taiwan. At the end of the day, here's 3 layers of why. First layer, dependency won't lead you into success at the end of the day. This whole life, Taiwan has been babied by China. Yeah, China fulfilling their political legitimacy, safety net, etc. And I think sure, it will give you many benefits at first and good international relations with China, only with China, because yeah, China basically limits your diplomatic relations with other countries by this framework. But then imagine when China has experienced some bad things towards their economy, etc. In the worst case, I think you will likely get the impacts too at that point because being dependent, meaning your faith depends on China too, your safety net depends on China too, especially where this framework limits you to having another diplomatic relationship with another country. Yeah, this is very important because you, as Taiwan, who already governs with your own democratic government, military, and legal system, and being dependent with another country. So, what's the point of having your own system of country if you keep on being dependent on China? Your safety net depends on China, but then in other side, imagine if you formally just abandon this framework, but with a backup plan, of course. Sure, you may struggle at first, but I think it's better rather than you don't have your own statement for the long term, because this will only make you question your identity and experience the crisis of identity, which also affects your citizens, your stakeholders, and many more. Then yeah, secondly, you're not abandoning it, formally abandoning it will only gives you self determination. I think I've already explained lots about dependency and its impact, and I'm gonna extend it by explaining to you to you on regarding on self-determination. So here's the thing: would you rather be a country who can expand your international diplomatic relations, getting many benefits from that, or being a country who gets control to choose something and even getting limited from having a diplomatic relations with us? With some other countries. This is very important because China is basically treating you like a doll, over controlling you, giving you like limited freedom, and yeah, basically limiting your freedom, etc. Because mind you, this can also lead into power abuse happening towards Taiwan simply because China has a great power over you. They can have threatened you for something you do, not do a certain thing from them. But then on the other side, you have a very limited diplomatic relations, so your safety net is actually in a crisis. Then imagine when you just formally abandon it.
POI?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, continuing.
What is this backup plan? What is this backup plan that you keep talking about as a safety net for China?
Okay, so I think the backup one will likely be okay, I will answer that later. I think phenomena such as like power abuse from abandoned creator. I think phenomena such as like power abuse, self determination, etc. will likely last to happen because our options, e.g., like having diplomatic relations with other countries, is not limited. Making our own decisions, etc., is not limited, and therefore we can actually create our own safety net by achieving it through getting as many diplomatic relations as we can, right? So then I think, yeah, therefore I've already explained to you on how Taiwan actually has many potential. That because of this framework, it'll just overshadowing Taiwan's potential. But then, yeah, comparing both sides of the house, I think in our side of the house, it's basically more worth it to trade off for the long term, because imagine you're a country and you're depending to another country for the long term. It'll not be worth it because we don't know what happens in the future towards China. Yeah, because yeah, imagine if I've already stated about like what if China experiences a crisis, then of course it'll affect you as Taiwan too, because firstly you don't have any backup like diplomatic relations, which your life depends on China. But then secondly, yeah, even if we struggle at first, but I think it's actually worth it because we already have like much backup plan. We've already like discussed so many times before, like choosing to formally abandon China. But then yeah, but then in their side, their whole life will likely depend on China, and it'll not be worth this for the long term because yeah, your safety net depends on China. You don't have your own identity, which affects identity crisis towards your stakeholders, and it'll make you confused to choose your own decision, to make your own statement or etc. Because you are basically being controlled by China, and it'll not be good for the long term. And therefore, I'm proud to oppose.
I think want to speech a call upon silent speaker of opposition. But before that, tadi tuh kayaknya agak nge-lag sih. Mungkin apakah coba tes dulu sebelum apa? Maybe just read the motion dulu sebelum you start the speech.
Halo? Tas. Audible nggak?
Can you try
Tas.
reading the motion?
Halo? 1, 2, 3. Hello? Tas.
I think there's a problem with your internet there.
Is it still laggy? I'm so sorry.
Can you try reading the
Halo?
motion?
Aduh, gimana ya? Give me a sec, give me a sec. Give me a sec. Let me just try to hotspot with my phone. Wait, bentar. Aku rejoin with my phone aja. Oh, nggak, with my iPad bisa sih. Wait. Bentar ya. I rejoin bentar ya. Ganti device. Tes. Apaan sih? Terus sinyalnya jelek banget.
Sorry, I just want to confirm that the POI was lagging and I was a bit confused right there.
Hello.
Guys, am I audible now?
Sekarang audible kok.
Oke, bentar, aku coba baca motion dulu atau gimana nih?
Ya, coba baca motion dulu aja.
This House believes that Taiwan should formally abandon the One China framework.
Yep, aman. You can just continue.
Bentar, POI, unmute aja and make yourselves very audible because, you know, my internet's kind of bad and I won't be opening the Zoom because I need to open my timer with my phone as well. Give me a second to just reorganize my papers, yeah. Give me a sec. Give me a sec to just also like figure out the timer situation. Or can someone like give timestamps in chat? I'm so sorry. Hello? Am I still audible?
Audible kok, audible.
Okay. Maaf banget ya. Yeah. I'll just start in 3, 2, 1. They can't bring a Hail Mary response by saying like, we have a backup plan. We have Taiwan's not stupid. Taiwan has a backup plan. If for example they were to like get if they were for example suddenly to like get attacked by China, for example, it's not like they have no safety nets left. Three things to point out before I move on then. Firstly, they never actually proved to you what this backup plan actually is. They never explained what capacity does Taiwan actually have in mitigating like all of the attacks that can possibly come from China. But then secondly, they never when they try to tell you like, Taiwan is already independent on its own, Taiwan has already has like the sovereignty, they're not dependent on anything. Gabby told you in her speech very clearly that Taiwan's economy is very dependent on China. I'm going to expand this later on in my class, but note that this is specifically important because without their side proving why Taiwan can survive on their own, then they can't like reap all of the benefits of sovereignty and all of these other stuff because at the end of the day all of these principal importances will die alongside with the people insofar they can't feed themselves, right? But then moving on to my then a few rebuttals before I move on to my extension then. Firstly, on their idea like sovereignty is important for Taiwan because they've worked so hard to like have their own government and etc. Three responses to this. Firstly, we already tell you that sovereignty isn't even the main case here, right? Because Taiwan isn't even a state to begin with. That is to say, they don't have the principal right to be sovereign because for you to have the principal right to be sovereign, you have to firstly be a nation. Insofar as they never proved to you why Taiwan is independent on its why Taiwan was like previously a state, hence why they have this right, they cannot run this case. But then secondly, we tell you that irrespective of this, Taiwan is already sovereign, like what they try to tell you. Sovereignty just talks about how you're able to govern yourself and how in charge you are over your own policies, which by the way, Taiwan already does have all of these things in the status quo. Like refer to the info slide or refer to their own speeches where they try to tell you like, Taiwan has their own government, they have their own president, military, and etc. This proves to you that Taiwan is already sovereign because the existence of China doesn't directly like impact the president that Taiwan has. For example, China doesn't have the jurisdiction to suddenly knock off the president of Taiwan and all of these other things. We prove to you that Taiwan is already sovereign. But then third response here, I'm going to tell you that sovereignty is not even important in the first place in this debate. But because this is a value judgment motion, right? Where you actually have to also prove the tangible benefits of all of these things, of all of the things that you have previously posited. Like for example, sovereignty doesn't bring any practical benefits to Taiwan, but sovereignty doesn't bring any practical benefits to Taiwan because Taiwan already has all of these benefits in the first place. But then second response here then on like their idea it's principally countries have the right to separate themselves. One response here, I think that if this debate is about principle, then I question if they support Taiwan leaving China informally as well with aggression, since apparently they also have the right to separate themselves, right? I tried to POI this multiple times, but they like said no to this, right? Said no to this. Hence why I don't think they can run the case of principle here as well. But then moving on to our first class, moving on to like the main class here then on like whether or not Taiwan is like independent or not. Two things under this. Firstly on economics, secondly on like military, and thirdly and finally on like international help and whatnot. Firstly, on economics, then I just don't think this is true, right? I think that Taiwan is still very dependent on China in their both like in their day-to-day transactions or even in trade. Why? Because Taiwan's main source of income comes from developing superconductor chips, like what Gabby already told you, or just chips in general that all of the factories within Taiwan produces these things. What does this actually imply, and why is what Gabby said important? Two things. A, the majority of Taiwan citizens work within the sector, whether it be as managers for these factories or as factory workers or being part of their research team and etc. But then B, where does Taiwan actually export their chips to? Exactly to China and exclusively them, right? Because only China has like the capability in the world right now to manufacture things like phones, laptops, and etc. Other alternatives for customers for Taiwan does not exist because the US or like Europe or whatever does not constitute big enough as a customer to cover for the losses that Taiwan will face if China were to pull out. But then why? But then China has nothing to lose under this. Why? Because if they stop buying conductor chips in Taiwan, let's operate in our worst case here. They can just immediately produce their own superconductor chips with their own technology, which is like much more advanced and much more highly adaptive factories, right? But even if this is true, we tell you that it's probably going to be fine because China as a state is strong enough to buy themselves out with their reserve money. If, for example, they don't have any more supply of semiconductor chips, they can afford to wait. But then second reason why Taiwan is so dependent on China. Then Taiwan's other economic sectors, like majority of their entrepreneurs and etc., operate their factories within China and directly benefit off of the fact that they don't have to change currencies or that they don't have to pay extra tax, for example, to have factories there and etc. But this also means that Taiwan separates with China. But this also means that when Taiwan separates with China, China has the right to all of these factories much more since they're in China's territory. But Taiwan also but then regardless of this, Taiwan also significantly benefits off of the cheap labor in China and how cheap logistics are to ship their factory produce from China to Taiwan, for example. This is why Taiwan's economy is super good right now because they're able to compete in the global scale for cheaper products without the help of China or without access to China. They're immediately going to get overtaken by other up and coming nations. What are the harms of this? Firstly, you get mass unemployment from factories and layoffs from the parent companies in Taiwan because they no longer have the demand. This means that people's livelihoods get threatened since living costs are like increasingly getting higher, where they don't have the safety nets to lose their jobs. Losing these jobs means that these people lose their buying power, meaning that even the smaller job sectors in Taiwan, like local businesses, will lose all their customers, hence slowing down the economy within Taiwan. But then this is important because regardless of all of the principles they bring on sovereignty and legitimacy, this directly impacts the people in Taiwan. When you pull away from China, the factories lose their money, they lose their revenue, which means that they all close down. We tell you that the harms of unemployment and people not having money is a harm that is felt immediately because this means that people can't fulfill their livelihoods, they can't feed themselves or like support their families, hence why they can't even reap the benefit of sovereignty under your side anyways. But then second thing under this clash, let's talk about military and protections, right? I'm going to extend on this as well. Why is playing ambiguous specifically important for Taiwan right now? But then firstly, why is it likely for China to actually attack Taiwan or other nations? We tell you it's two things. One, China has the anti-secession law that legit states if Taiwan or any part of China wants to separate, even if it's formally, legalizes China to use non-peaceful means, i.e. military aggressions, or like bombing or like shooting down these people and sending military towards these areas. This proves to you that China is more than willing to attack Taiwan. But then secondly, we tell you that Taiwan doesn't have the safety nets to fight China back simply because their military power is not that strong. Sure, they have support from sure, they have like guns and like all of these other things that are supplied by the US. But we tell you that this is much marginal in comparison to China because China has so much more people in terms of population. But then secondly, in terms of like proximity, China is extremely close to Taiwan. Where if Taiwan were to get attacked by China, there is not enough time for the US to help and help to intervene. But then why is the lessening of allies specifically exclusive to not staying ambiguous? We tell you that one, when you officially leave China and the state and like state that you're on your own, other states recognize you as an enemy of sorts to China because from past precedents, we see that China has been obviously protective of Taiwan. The reason why China keeps enforcing the framework is that they say Taiwan is inseparable to China. They legit become enemies with nations that claim China is independent by not wanting to be diplomatic with them. Take, for example, how China blocked Taiwan from joining the UN because the PRC is apparently also inclusive to Taiwan as well. This means that when other countries think of like supporting Taiwan, they're more likely to not want to do this because they do not want to go against the
Time.
superpower of China. I'm sorry for being over time. I don't have a timer with me.
All right, it's okay. I think we just continue. Third speaker of proposition.
Hello?
Yep, audible.
Okay. Hold on. Can you give me a minute? I want to go to the toilet.
Oke, yang lain kalau misalnya mau ke toilet, boleh juga. Just tell me in the chat, so we'll wait for you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm back. Sorry. Okay.
Oke, nggak apa-apa. We can just continue.
Sorry. Time my speech. And 3, 2, 1. The passionate debate that is about which house creates better outcome in terms of principle and in terms of practical. To clarify several things. Firstly, why sovereignty is very important. My PM and DPM has said it to you. Sovereignty is very important because it gives country the right to decide its own future. If Taiwan cannot determine its own political identity without worrying about China's approval, then its democracy is incomplete. The whole point of having elections, a government, and a democratic institution is that Taiwanese people, not another country, should decide what Taiwan is and where it is going. I'm going to extend that later in my comparison. But several backup plan to clarify, because Chloe has talked to you so much regarding this. I think in terms of economic safety net, before formally abandoning the One China framework, we gradually reduce the economic vulnerability. Why? Simply because our government is still rational. We have still so many people under our sort of the house in government, right? We expand trade and investment with existing partners, provide temporary financial assistance to industries most affected by Chinese sanctions. We can still do that and create retraining and employment programs for workers if necessary. So I think at the end of the day, those kind of things can still happen. But sure, let's talk about diplomatic international relation thinking. I think we don't announce this in isolation. We coordinate with our closest partner beforehand so they understand our position and can prepare their own responses. That reduces diplomatic uncertainty and help preserve economic and security cooperation. But yeah, let's answer their concern regarding military. I think at the purpose of the day, a rational government would never formally abandon the One China framework without first strengthening its defense preparedness. That is to say that increasing military that means that we increase military readiness, stockpiling essential equipment and ammunition, and conducting more defense training and preparing contingency plans before the policy is implemented. We don't create necessary unnecessary vulnerability. We prepare for the possibility of retaliation. But yeah, let's talk about the impact that they were concerning about. They try to bring you several things. Firstly, we're going to lose a big income economically, etc. I think first they assume that China is Taiwan's only economic lifeline. That's not simply true. Taiwan has strong economic value on its own. In fact, because Taiwan has advanced technology, a skilled workforce, and reliable institutions. Those fundamentals don't disappear because Taiwan changes its diplomatic position. It's not like your life ends when China stops supporting you. But secondly, even if some investors leave, it doesn't mean that everyone leaves. Investors follow profit. As long as Taiwan remains economically valuable, there will be still some business and countries that want to cooperate with it, which my DPM has talked to you on how we can still bounce back as a country economically, even if it is still going to be harmful under our side of the house. But thirdly, they say that people lose jobs. That's just an exaggeration. You cannot generalize like that. Taiwan's entire economy does not depend on China alone. Domestic industries, technology, manufacturing, and trade with other partners is still going to exist. They fail to prove to you why one diplomatic decision suddenly destroys an entire.
POI
But more importantly, they are asking Taiwan to keep compromising its sovereignty simply to avoid economic pressure. That only makes China's economic coercion more effective in the future. Under our side, we're trying to stop that dependency, but under opposition side of the house, the dependency never disappears. Taiwan may enjoy short-term economic stability, but every year it becomes more tied to China's market and resources. Taiwan's ability to feed its people simply depends on China's economic condition. This gives China greater leverage to pressure Taiwan whenever political tensions arise, because Taiwan knows that resisting could come with severe economic consequences. That dependency is much more dangerous. But yeah, let's talk about the military thingy. Our weapon is being allocated to US-Iran war. You're vulnerable. That's what they say. Taiwan is already under military pressure today. That's what you need to notice. China already conducts military drills outside aircraft near Taiwan under one China framework. Here's the thing. Taiwan is strategically important in the Indo-Pacific. Many countries cooperate with Taiwan because stability in the Taiwan Strait affects their own security and economic interests. Those incentives do not simply disappear because Taiwan formally defines its political status. But yeah, let's talk about international relation. Again, I think their argument is very overstatement. Many countries already officially recognize the PRC while maintaining strong unofficial trade, investment, and security cooperation with Taiwan. That proves countries are capable of balancing relations with both sides when it serves their interests. But countries make foreign policy based on strategic and economic interests, not simply because China tells them to. Taiwan remains one of the world's most important technology and semiconductor partners. Those incentives to cooperate do not simply disappear. But yeah, I think my DPM has also talked to you on how like China, no, there are still some countries who don't really want China to dominate. Therefore, no, it's not like our countries will take side to China automatically. But they assume that once Taiwan abandons the one China framework, it automatically loses its legitimacy to participate internationally. I don't think that follows. Membership and participation in international organizations are automatically political decisions made by other states and the organizations themselves. Not automatic legal consequence of our policy. Taiwan's formal position does not suddenly erase importance, technological leadership, or strategic value to the international economy. But let's talk about certainty on sovereignty, because that's what they concern the most. Taiwan already has its own president, sure, etc. However, because it still operates under the one China framework, China continues claiming Taiwan as part of its territory. This creates a never-ending cycle of uncertainty over who ultimately has the right to determine Taiwan's future. That's why sovereignty is very important in the very first place. But under their side, Taiwan is stuck in this position forever. They ask Taiwan to keep acting like an independent country, but never actually acknowledge it. This sends mixed signal. China continues believing reunification is still possible, so it keeps using military threats and diplomatic pressure to push Taiwan towards the outcome. Taiwan's allies are also left guessing because Taiwan itself has never clearly stated where it stands. Why is this inherently harmful? Because Taiwan's sovereignty is constantly left open for negotiation. So I think that is where what opposition has never understood. China believes it still has a legitimate crime over Taiwan, while other countries continue treating Taiwan's status as politically unresolved. As a result, Taiwan cannot fully exercise its sovereignty because every major diplomatic or security decision is constrained by the need to preserve strategic ambiguity. Instead of deciding its future based solely on the will of its people, Taiwan is constantly forced to consider how China and international community will react. Under our sort of the house, that uncertainty ends. Taiwan finally makes it clear that reunification is not its future. Once that happens, Taiwan's sovereignty is no longer hidden behind diplomatic ambiguity. Every actor now knows that Taiwan's future will be determined by Taiwanese people, not by China's expectation. Why is this important? Because sovereignty is not just is about having government, just like what their second speaker tried to tell you. It is about having the freedom to decide your own future. Under our side, Taiwan can long-term. Well, I'm gonna answer your POI later. Long-term defense, diplomacy, and foreign policy based on its own national interests instead of constantly preserving an ambiguous status quo to satisfy like China, etc. Right? Taiwan stops reacting to China's narrative and start acting according to its own. So yeah, that is what we're trying to talk about right here. But even if our policy is seen as provocating by China, I think that is still okay. The reason is simple. China's behavior is not conditional on our own policy. Even under the status quo, China is already conducting military drills, sending fighters, and diplomatically isolating Taiwan. There is a kind of claim that they avoid provocation. They only keep Taiwan silent in the hope that China will be less aggressive, yet the aggression continue anyways. Why is it in their side is going to be more harmful at the end of the day? If Taiwan keeps limiting its own political identity simply because it is afraid of provoking China, then China effectively gains a veto over Taiwan's sovereign decision. Every time China threatens retaliation, Taiwan becomes less able to exercise its own self-determination. That sets a dangerous precedent because it means external threats are allowed to determine the political future of a democratic society. So we win in terms of principle. They say to you that PRC gives Taiwan probably economic resources, and this but yeah, I'm going to tell you on how this creates a form of our abuse. Countries are able to use Taiwan's need for economic and military support as a leverage to influence one of the most fundamental decisions a nation can make, its own identity. Taiwan is essentially told you can receive our support, but only if you continue limiting how you defend yourself. This is inherently harmful because it undermines the principle of self-determination. A democratic society should be able to decide its own political future based on the will of its people, not based on what other states are willing to tolerate. So I think at the end of the day, in terms of principle, we can win, but in terms of practical, we can also still win. They're basically their benefit regarding economic just do exist symmetrically. We can still win in both sides. They cannot win in principle. So Pratu, what is it? Propose.
Right, I want a speech. Call upon third speaker of opposition.
Okay. Actually, I'm also kind of kabulat, but you know what? For the sake of this debate, I'm gonna hold it in. I'm setting up my timer. I hope I'm audible. All right. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, we think that the government case relies on a fatal mistake, right? We think it would be useless and funny for what is it? Oh my God. For a country to treat their survival, to treat their safety only for meaningless sovereignty, proud to oppose. Now characterization. What is the type of motion about, right? This is a principal judgment panel. So notice that the metric of this weighing should be A, upon the principle of pragmatic. What does it mean? Which side would ensure regional stability and peace? But then secondly, on the principle of functionality, which side would give Taiwan actual power to do many international things beyond only being validated as a country. For example, A, trading with the entire world, B, buying military weapons, and C, choose their governing itself. But then panel several points out. Firstly, government being too scaredy so that they only play in their best case scenario and never touch our case, and how by leaving the framework, they will have a potential big enemy that is within their proximity. This shows how unsure they are in their own case and how they have lost the. And secondly, government also repeatedly mentioned how sovereignty would be very important, which they have failed to elaborate on how it directly affects Taiwan. Besides, I want to be noticed as a country. They also failed to show you directly, step by step, how this will become the heart of the debate, right? But notice that their entire cases pivot on this, so it shows that their entire premise would fail. But moreover, our side of the house has actually acknowledged the more important thing that Taiwan needs to fulfill is. But then thirdly, we think that the backup plan that the government came and say it came very late in their third speaker in their side panel. So we think that the point would not be that contributive for the case. But then again, it was one, and we have never even hear any elaboration further. So again, no responses in that side. But then one rebuttal that is very important in the terms of sovereignty. The government side says that sovereignty is the ultimate democratic right because it allows a nation to make decisions for itself, right? They tell us that it is justified to sacrifice economic stability and peace to achieve this perfect sovereignty. This is a very beautiful theory, panels, but notice that it completes false in practice. You cannot make decisions for yourself if you no longer exist, right? The government assumes that after Taiwan abandons the framework, Taiwan would still be a functioning democracy that gets to make choices. It won't. Notice that the moment Taiwan drops the framework, it will trigger a military invasion or a crushing blockade by China, right? When your power grid is destroyed, your internet is cut off, for example, and your territory is under a military siege, you have less sovereignty, not more, right? So you have traded an imperfect democracy for an absolute destruction. And moreover, my second speaker also have mentioned to you that Taiwan was never a country to begin with. There only a region. So in the beginning, there's no sovereignty whatsoever. But then secondly, furthermore, the government also acts like Taiwan is currently have no sovereignty, right? But this is true because right now, under the protection of One China framework, Taiwan actually is able to make their own decisions, right? Taiwan still be able to make a lot of decisions, and they're able to create like their own laws, right? So the framework is the only reason that Taiwan has peace and stability required to run democracy, right? Government wants to trade away the real functioning sovereignty that Taiwan still enjoying every single day until now, just to chase a symbolic sovereignty on a piece of paper. That's not something that is very worth it as a trade-off. But then let's look at their worst case scenario. Let us pretend that China does not invade with missiles, but instead uses economic warfare, right? The government say it is justified to trade away economic conditions for sovereignty, right? Let's take a look what actually means for a democracy. If Taiwan's economy collapses because allies stop trading with us to protect their businesses with China, Taiwan would become weak. A nation with a broken economy, a nation with starving citizens and zero energy security cannot make independent choices. It becomes entirely dependent on foreign aid, or even worse, it would be even vulnerable to being completely swallowed by China, right? So true democratic sovereignty actually requires a strong economy to back it up. So if you decided to leave leave the framework, it will destroy Taiwan's economic stability, and the government side would actively destroy Taiwan's capacity to defend its own democracy. But then, yeah, what is the weighing upon this rebuttal? Their argument is irresponsible. They're asking the citizens of Taiwan to pay the ultimate price, like their safety, for example, their jobs, for example, their lives, for example, to change in a sovereignty whatsoever, right? They believe that democracy's highest duty but in our side of the house, we believe that the highest duty of the democracy is actually to protect the lives and actual freedom of these people. Now moving on to my clashes. Firstly, which side would maximize Taiwan's true national interest, and then secondly, which side would preserve international diplomacy. Taiwan's primary. Now moving on to my first clash. Taiwan's primary national interest is about dignity. Like it's yeah. They say that it's about self determination and truth, right? Living under a one China identity is very humiliating. So that Taiwan is not seen as one individual country, right? Now, we believe that they misunderstood how the hierarchy of national interest works, right? It is not only defined what's written on legal document, right? Notice that in reality, under the protection of one China framework, Taiwan has successfully built everything on what true nation desires: a tech economy, an independent passport, for example, a highly capable military, and also they already have a thriving democracy there. This is what my first and second speaker have mentioned to you over and over again. But then secondly, the framework does not lock Taiwan in a cage panels. Notice that it acts like a like a protection for them, right? It satisfied their pride on paper while also allowing Taiwan to build real world independence under it, right? So true national interest of Taiwan is protecting this substance, not only by chasing a sovereignty that is still abstract. But then let's play directly into the government's hand and accept their worst case scenario. Let us concede that one China framework is deeply unfair, right? Let us agree that it is an exhausting, frustrating, and humiliating diplomatic that hurts the pride of Taiwanese people. Even if we grant all of that, the lie is what keeps the people alive. If Taiwan formally abandons the framework, China's response would not be diplomatic, right? It would be more likely military, right? Notice that the law that is happening in China, like the anti-secession law, for example, legally binds them to use non-peaceful means if Taiwan officially changes its status. But then, secondly, the moment Taiwan chooses formal dignity over the framework, China would launch a total maritime blockage or a full-scale missile strike, right? Taiwan's semiconductor factory would stop running, and the power would go dark, and people would go in like this constant oppression under China. You no longer can enjoy national dignity if your country has been reduced to somewhat dysfunctional. But then my second clash is about, yeah, which one preserve international diplomacy. Notice that the government has a nice view of how global diplomacy works. Like foreign nations do not protect Taiwan out of pure moral charity. They protect Taiwan because the current setup is economically and politically convenient for them. Hey, the United States and its allies use the one China framework as a diplomatic loophole. Notice that it allows Washington to tell China that, oh, we acknowledge your one China claim, while also with saying to Taipei that, oh, here's a billions of dollars in advance of weapons trade, right? But then secondly, if Taiwan formally abandons the framework, it seals that loophole, right? So it forces allies to make an absolute choices between official relations with Beijing in China or official relations with Taiwan, right? Because China is the second largest economy on earth and a nuclear armed superpower, most risk averse nation will choose their economic survival and side with Beijing, completely isolating Taiwan. And that's why you should oppose.
Thank you for the speech, calling upon the reply speaker of opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, audible.
All right, give me a sec. Set up my timer and I'll start. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the main reason that Pop's case cannot win this debate is because they literally do not understand how big of a harm that we already posited to you within the first two speakers, right? Not only do you lose China not only do you get sanctions from China, but you also get sanctions from a majority of countries. This is what we already posited to you in first speaker, right? But before I move on to my two clashes, few call outs and strategic flaws from each of their speakers. I think firstly, PM's case is very tense with their own case, right? They tell you that Taiwan already has freedom, and then in the same speech they tell you that Taiwan is incredibly limited, right? I think they already killed their own urgency of their own case from PM, right? But also secondly, I think a lot of their case was very best case scenario, right? For example, when they tell you that when they tell you that there's going to be a backup plan on DPM, right? And this was their main response to our case, right? Firstly, it's missing two things. Firstly, there's no mechanism on what exactly this plan is, right? But also secondly, there's simply no likelihood analysis on why there's going to be a backup plan, right? I think that we finally get this response in WHIP, right? Where they actually attempt to address what exactly this is going to be, right? But note that this is not only late content, it is new content, which means that you cannot even credit this because it came out on WHIP, right? But also still, even if you buy it, there's still no likelihood analysis on it, right? But also lastly, I think WHIP cannot just go I think WHIP's main strategy was just to say that, oh, this is exaggerated and like there's no likelihood on this, right? Obviously, when trade fails, the manufacturing sector is also going to fail, which means that people are going to lose jobs. This is not worst case, this is just what's going to happen. But two clashes then I'll address to you within my speech. Firstly, on relationship with other country, right? What did Prop tell you? Prop told you three things. Firstly, that there's going to be a limit on diplomacy, right? But also secondly, that you're going to harm legitimacy or sovereignty, and lastly, on like dependency, right? What did we tell you? We tell you two things. Firstly, that you're going to harm international relations with other countries, right? But also secondly, that we also tell you that you're going to harm legitimacy, right? Which directly clashes with their case. But why do we win? Why do we win on this clash, right? I think firstly, because our mechanism was clear. Our mechanism was clearer, right? I think they don't actually tell you like the step by step on how this is actually going to translate, right? Which means that simply they don't have enough likelihood analysis. They do not have enough visualization on what actually their world will look like, on what actually their impacts will look like, right? But also secondly, I think we already take this down on like all three speakers, right? We already tell you that on like legitimacy or whatnot, it's going to be worse because you have to rebuild it. But also secondly, we already tell you that you don't actually that this is not as important, right? That's not as important, right? But also lastly, we already tell you that Taiwan does not have this in the first place. So what exactly are you harming, right? But also, even if you completely buy all of their harms, I think you can weigh both of this on like just scale on impact in general, right? I think this is an IR motion. It affects a lot of people, right? On our side, we really tell you exactly how it impacts people's daily lives, right? Such as like having trade sanctions or having like ally loss, right? But all they tell you, their impacts basically stop at a principle, right? The only impact that we get is, oh, you're going to fall into an identity crisis. The question is, would you rather have an identity crisis or not be able to survive in your own country, right? I think we can win on scale of impact. But second clash then on relations with China. We already tell you that you're going to have economic and military sanctions from China, right? But note that we already tell you the impacts of this. Firstly, like people will literally fall into poverty, right? They will literally live every day scared that they're going to be attacked by China, and their government no longer has funds to build infrastructure or to like advance healthcare or education, right? There's going to be massive job loss, and there's going to be a harm on livelihood, right? There's simply no engagement on this class besides, oh, there's going to be a backup plan, which we already tell you was very insufficient and it was late matter, right? Which is why there's simply just no engagement on this clash in the first place. And yeah, you should weigh this on urgency, and that is why I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you for the speech calling upon the reply of proposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, audible.
Wait, kind of lost my. Hold on. All right, setting up my timer. I will begin my reply in 3, 2, 1. After hearing today's debate, one thing becomes very clear. The opposition wants Taiwan to continue limiting itself simply because China is bigger and more powerful. Our side believes that that is exactly the problem this motion is trying to fix. Before I move on to my extensions, let me first respond to their major arguments here. The opposition spends almost their entire speech telling you one thing, which is China will get angry, China will sanction Taiwan, China will stop trading, China will pressure other countries. But panels here, ask yourself this question: isn't China already doing those things today? China already pressures countries to not to recognize Taiwan, right? China already blocks Taiwan from joining many international organizations. China already sends military aircraft and ships near Taiwan. China already uses economic pressure whenever Taiwan strengthens relationship with other countries. So if all of these things are already happening under one China framework, then what exactly is this framework protecting Taiwan from? The opposition calls it a safety net. We call it an illusion because the framework has never stopped China's pressure. It has only stopped Taiwan from honestly defining itself. Next, let's talk about the economy. Opposition tells you, oh, Taiwan's economy will collapse because China must stop trading. This argument assumes that Taiwan's economy depends entirely on China, right? That is simply not true. Taiwan is one of the world's most important producers of semiconductors. Countries around the world rely on Taiwan because Taiwan provides something they truly need. Trade does not only happen because countries like each other. Trade happens because both sides benefits. If another country needs Taiwanese technology, they will continue finding ways to cooperate with Taiwan because it is also in their own interest. More importantly, opposition asks you to believe that every country will automatically choose China, but today's world shows something different. Many countries are already trying to reduce their dependence on China because they do not want one country becoming too dominant over the global economy. So Taiwan is not standing alone here. Now let me move out what our prime minister already proved. Our prime minister explained that sovereignty means having the freedom to decide your own identity. I want to this debate is not about legal recognition. It is about who gets to tell Taiwan's story. Right now, Taiwan already governs itself. Taiwan already elects its own leader. Taiwan already protects its own borders. But every time Taiwan wants to introduce itself to the world, another government speaks first. China tells the world who Taiwan is. China tells the world that Taiwan is allowed what Taiwan is allowed to do. China tells the world how Taiwan should be treated, and that is not sovereignty. That is another country controlling your political identity. When your identity is constantly being decided by someone else, your democracy becomes incompletable, and this has been explained by my second speaker. Because democracy is not only about voting every 4 years, democracy is about allowing people to decide who they are without another government speaking over them. The opposition's solution is to continue living inside that contradiction forever. They are asking Taiwan to remain politically unclear simply because China might become upset. That creates a very dangerous principle. It tells every powerful country that if you threaten another country enough, eventually that country should give up its own identity. We completely reject that principle. Power should never decide who you are. Your people should. Finally, panels, look at the difference between both sides. The opposition asked Taiwan to stay silent because they are afraid of China's reaction. Our side asks Taiwan to finally be honest about reality that already exists. Taiwan is already self-governing. Taiwan is already not democratic. Taiwan is already making its own decision. We are not creating a new reality. We're simply allowing Taiwan's official position to finally match the reality its people have lived for decades. For all these reasons, very proud to stand with the government. Thank you.
Right, thank you for the speech. Marks the end of the debate. This is an open round, so there will be an OA. Me and my panel will be deliberating for a bit before coming here